All right. Hi there. My name is Jessica Crow, and I am the founder of Apogy. Apogy is a change management training and consulting firm. And this is Change Leader Insights. This is our podcast series. And I'm so excited to have Anthony Casablanca with us. Hi, Anthony. How are you?
Hi, Jessica. Doing great. Thanks.
Good, good. So Anthony I'm going to read this because there's a lot of cool stuff that Anthony has done. So Anthony is an author, he's a speaker, he's a consultant, he's a trainer, and he's with Grief Leaders, which is a company that you and your brother started back in 2019, around the time that you launched the book that you co-authored called The Dying Art of Leadership. And your firm, you're a change management training, a consulting firm focused on how to help organizations, I believe you say, change how change is implemented, with the understanding that grief is a core component of change, our experience with change. And I'm really happy to have you here because I align with the idea and the message so much around really understanding grief and how it impacts individual organizational readiness and ability to change. So tell everyone who's going to be watching and listening to this conversation, how you landed with Grief Leaders in more detail. So the background around how you kind of came to be.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. This is awesome. Love to talk about and share our thoughts and philosophies around change management and the emotional component of change.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Back in 2019, my brother and I, we had been thinking about, he's 10 years younger than I am. He's a duly licensed funeral director. We had been thinking about ways to work together on some projects, and grief in the workplace started to be sort of a commonly written about phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And with his funeral service background, my senior leadership background, we decided to come together and start a training company. And our advisors said, two of which were best-selling leadership authors, said, boy, we've been doing this leadership training thing a long time. We've never seen anybody approach the topic the way you guys are from a leadership perspective. You ought to write a book. So we really didn't have plans to write a book, but we took a year and wrote the book. And really, as we were pulling together our thoughts around what we do and who we are, I realized that over my career, I had been blessed, right? I spent 31 years as a senior leader. I had been blessed to work for people who really got the human element of everything, right? And I recognized and had the opportunity to work on projects that at the time, huge change leadership projects that at the time seemed like these god-awful assignments because I was shutting down a plant or I was, managing layoffs but in reality, because of the guidance I got from my mentors as I was going through it, I learned an awful lot about the human and emotional impact leadership decisions have on people, right? I got to experience where the rubber met the road, where I had to sit down across the table from Jessica and tell her that her plant was closing. She was no longer going to have a job, but hey, we're going to help you through all of this. And developed incredible relationships. The projects were enormously successful. And so as I reflected back, there was sort of this natural link between my career experience and the work we were about to embark on, which is helping organizations navigate the emotional component of change. Because it's a cycle, change, grief, change. You can't break it, right? Anytime a person experiences what they perceive to be a loss, they will grieve. And that loss can be the loss of a loved one. It can be a significant illness diagnosis. It could be a child being bullied at school, or it could be a significant change in their work life, which triggers a whole bunch of emotion. And what we found is leaders are not trained on how to deal with that. And so they ignore it and they wait for performance issues to arise. And then they deal with the performance, which just compounds the problem.
Yeah.
And good people wind up leaving organizations because, frankly, they weren't supported very well through the change process.
Yeah, that's such an important call out where they wait for the performance management opportunity to come in and then they deal with it. And, from some of the literature and content that you've created, you've talked about how it shows up as resistance when in reality, they're just going through this process of grief. And change management as practitioners, we're trained on, Bridges transition model starts with that ending. And then you have to mourn the loss of the old way before you can get to that neutral zone where you start to play with the idea of, okay, what could this be like in the new environment? And then start that new beginning. So having what's really neat is that, you understand the leadership aspects, you understand the change management side, and then both you and your brother, he's also got that experience dealing with individuals and the extremes of grief. So it's like this, your brain power has come together to create this way of approaching how leaders help people navigate emotions, that grief emotion, that grief process in the workplace. So let's say I'm a leader of a team. We're going through a workplace change. Maybe we're implementing a new system that's going to end up replacing and potentially eliminating some of the jobs, the roles on the team. But we'll have this, new solution that's automated and centralized, and it's great in so many ways. But there's also, you've got some people that'll be sticking around, some that may need to be put into different roles. How would you approach that conversation with the leadership team or the leader of the team as it relates to bringing in that element of grief into the conversation?
Right. So I'm glad you threw in the leadership team, right? Because that's really where our work begins, is way back at the sort of the initial spark of, hey, we want to implement this change, right? The earlier we can be engaged in the process, the better the outcomes.
Yeah.
So a couple of things there. One, we would ask the leadership team, most change leadership, most change implementation processes follow the same sort of, develop a burning platform, communicate the burning platform, tell people why, right? Share the vision. Why is this going to be a better thing? Implement the change, hold people accountable, and move on, right? And while there are elements of the human change model that people teach, like you mentioned, the Bridges model, and ProSci teaches some, what winds up happening is the leadership team just overruns all of that.
Totally.
Right? And they want, right. It quickly devolves to project management. And the human element, even if the change leadership group the change management group has been trained that way, the processes typically don't support them actually going and do that. So we meet with organizations and we ask them to think about a couple of questions before they even embark on all of that process, which is, do we care about the emotional and leadership health of our organization, right? Do we understand it, right? So we may care about it. Do we understand it, right? And do we have a change management process that addresses the emotional elements of change, right? And then those three questions lead to, is our culture ready to support this change? Are our frontline leaders prepared to support the change? Because one of the things that gets overlooked is the very people that you're asking to lead the change are probably being impacted by the change, and they're going through this, they're grappling with all of the same emotions, right? And they often get left out of the equation, right? We say, hey, go do this. In the meantime, that's great, but I'm wondering, well, who am I going to report to, and what happens to my organization, and am I even going to have a job? And so I'm battling all of those emotions as well. And then finally, is our change management process really robust enough to handle this change? So it really starts there. And of course, in order to understand the emotional and leadership health of the organization, you need to assess it. And so, we would not really like to engage. By the time most organizations call us, it's probably already too late, right? Because things are already in motion and they're asking us to go back and sort of undo things.
Right.
But if we had our way, we would start the process with an emotional and leadership health assessment
Yeah.
that we have. Um, and then that sort of points us in the right direction, right? Because we can by function, by team, by organization, we can now start to say, hey, these elements are lacking in your
Hmm.
culture. Your people do not feel respected, right?
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
your people do not feel emotionally and psychologically safe. Or this team, right? The culture of the organization may be good, but this particular team may be lacking in those things, right? So we need to sit down with the leader and we need to understand more about their style and how they engage with people. Um, and so that's really where our process starts,
Stars. Yeah.
um, is building through that process. And then at the individual leader perspective, which is where your question started, we find that most leaders fall into the trap of managing uniformly, right?
Hmm.
And I almost am hesitant to say leaders, right? We find most managers fall into the trap of managing uniformly.
Hmm.
And during times of change, frankly, always, but especially during times of change, leaders need to adapt their leadership approach to match the needs of their people. And
Hmm.
most leaders don't do that, right?
Not
Um,
many had a good example set for them, right? I mean, I think
exactly.
that, as you're saying all this, not to kind of weave in another idea here, but
No, go
it's
ahead.
interesting that kind of where we're at as being able to talk about grief and emotion and caring for people in a more personalized way. And, I've talked about this with lots of guests on the show, and I've sort of woven it into my own approach. But prior to the pandemic, and I hate to use it as the anchor point, but it felt like that was, having these types of conversations there's less of an appetite for it. And then today, recognizing that the grief that you're talking about is related to the change at work, but there's so much grief that we've experienced over the last few years
Right.
as a result of the pandemic, and in just daily life there's a lot of challenges, and we bring our whole selves to work, and it feels like now there's an appreciation, value in having conversations around the well-being, the emotional needs of our employees. And we've seen the people responding because and making changes, like leaving the organization, the great resignation, the great reset, all of the
Right.
things that have happened. It's like we're finally having these really important conversations that it existed that way before, but it just wasn't the same. If you were to talk about the C-suite, how the emotional needs of your employees, they'd be like, it wasn't as there wasn't as much there was caring individuals, but it wasn't the same that it is now. It just feels different, and I'm grateful for that. I mean, do you agree with my line of thinking, or do you see it as like this has just been a long time coming regardless, even the conversation
Um,
around grief and how we lead
yeah.
versus manage?
So I think what the pandemic did was it it clearly sort of distilled the muddy waters.
Hmm.
So people have never been able to check their personal lives at the door, although
Yeah.
that was what organizations expected, right?
Right.
And leaders are told not to go there and don't talk about it, and that's that soft emotional stuff. Don't do that, right? But what the pandemic did overnight was
Literally.
it blurred those lines, right?
Yeah.
Because now work was home and home was work. And there was
Hmm.
all of this, right? We could no longer separate the two.
Hmm.
And so from that perspective, and then we had all of the loss and the trauma
Yeah.
and the isolation and all of the things that went on, and the struggle to try to understand the information that was being thrown at us all, and are masks right or not, right? What should what 6 feet, what do we do, where do we go,
Right.
right?
So much
We can't get
confusion.
toilet paper, right? There was just all that stuff going on, and so it brought it to the forefront, right? But even before that,
Hmm.
right, the Grief Recovery Institute did a study that would indicate that 1 in 4 people were grieving at work
I
every
believe
single day.
that. Yeah.
1 in 4 people, and it was costing organizations $100 billion a year, right? And then when you extrapolate that a little further, right, because we like to think people are burned out, which is a very
Mm-hmm.
clinical sort of sanitary term that makes the problem the employee's fault rather
Mm-hmm.
than there's something that's going on in our work culture that causes
Mm-hmm.
that. But burnout is actually just a symptom of grief, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Something has changed in the work arrangement that this person perceives to be um, uh, life altering and permanent, right?
Mm.
I'm tired of working all these Saturdays. I'm tired of working 14 hours a day. This wasn't what I signed up for. I have a new leader and the culture of the organization has changed, right? Those are the things that lead to burnout. And it's an
Mm-hmm.
issue that the organization needs to deal with. When you throw that on top of it, now you start to get some other statistics in play, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
70% of the workforce is disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
13% of those are actively sort of sabotaging the organization. Burnout leads to $190 billion a year in added healthcare costs, two and a
Mm-hmm.
half times more likely to take sick days. Those people are more likely to leave. And so it's been there. What
Yeah.
happened with the pandemic was we could no longer avoid it, right?
Yeah.
We
We made a
suddenly
name
had to
for it
have
too.
those
Yeah. Yeah.
conversations, right? And the organizations that truly do it well, I believe, are thriving.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are doing it just for messaging and because it seems like they should be doing it, even though they really don't believe in it, um, their people are
Struggle.
seeing through that and are
Yeah.
leaving and they're struggling and right. Um, I,
Or
I don't
phoning it
care how
in,
many
they're just,
gender
yeah.
neutral bathrooms you have or how much time you give people to do yoga or how much you have mental wellness benefits and all of that. At the end of the day, all of the stuff we're talking about comes back to leadership
Mm-hmm.
and organizations that recognize that and invest in that, they will do well. The
Mm-hmm.
organizations that just want to track the numbers and say, hey, look at us, right? And they have all of this nice flowery messaging, but they're really not changing the way they do business inside the
Mm-hmm.
organization. They're the ones that are struggling and people are leaving and nobody wants to work there.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely right. So, as for leaders in an organization, why is grief such an important emotion to be thinking about? Um, why is it such a powerful emotion? How does it, walk us through how this plays into the maybe the coaching and
Sure.
recommendations that you give to organizations on something that is unavoidable and also hugely impactful.
Sure, sure. So let's talk a little bit about on the change management, change leadership side of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? So absolutely anytime a person experiences what they believe to be a loss of any kind,
Mm-hmm.
that will trigger the grief cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the gap, as I've alluded to a little bit earlier, is the implementation models do not agree and do not comprehend and do not include the scientific models of change, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
this huge gap. If you Google the science of change, almost every single graph that comes up will include the 5 stages of grief, right? It's an emotional
Right.
curve, right, that they show. But when you Google change implementation models, those are not there, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
so long before you ever announce the change, right? People are very insightful. Organizations are very insightful. Um, there's this thing called anticipatory grief. People
Mm.
start to see signs, they start to hear rumblings, right? And they start to think about, oh my gosh, if we're going to do this, I wonder what if we're going to be acquired? I think the company's going to be up for sale. I think we're going to be acquiring another company. What's going to happen to us here in finance? Because they're not going to need 2 finance departments, right? All of that starts to play out.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 studies that were done. Harvard did a study that said that 75% of all change initiatives fail at some level, right? They fail to deliver the anticipated results at some level. McKinsey followed that up and found that 70% of those failures were related to human and cultural issues, right? It wasn't because it was a bad strategy. It wasn't because it was the wrong solution or a poor technical solution. It's because of human and cultural issues. The human issue is this emotion that we're talking about, right? People are not resistant to change. They just resist being changed, right?
Yeah, being told what to do.
Exactly, right? And a leader's failure to acknowledge what the person is feeling is what leads to the failures, right? That's what leads to the resistance, right? And I could give you some fancy terms. It's actually called disenfranchised grief, right?
Okay.
If I fail to acknowledge your emotions, you feel invalidated, you feel almost like unbelieved, right?
Yeah.
You don't feel supported. You go deeper into the emotion, right? Now you're angry at me or the organization, right? I've now made your grief more complex, right? So it's called disenfranchised grief. Leaders who do support the person, leaders who do engage in the discussion, now I've validated your emotions. And I'm not just, this discussion is not just to make sure you understand the key messages of the organization.
Yeah.
This is truly to understand how can we help you through this, right? What are you experiencing? What are your issues? What questions do you have, right? What emotions are you feeling, right? And not everybody's going to share, but that's okay, right? That's not the goal, is to get everybody to share. The goal is to get people to recognize that I care about you as a person, right?
Which
and that I recognize what you're going through.
Yeah, I mean, that is, not something that, I mean, you can, as I'm thinking about, as you were talking, I was thinking about past experiences with leaders when a change would happen, and the key message was just, you need to be more adaptable, be more flexible when these things happen. That is that disenfranchised.
Right. You need to get over it.
Yeah. It's like, wait a second. So everything you said makes so much sense. But then when I think about the individual who delivered that message, my next thought as you were talking was, I don't know if they had the skills themselves to, or the capacity to have that type of, or even the desire, right, to make that emotional connection, because what you're describing makes a lot of sense, but it really transforms how we think about leaders in the organization, from that performance management, they didn't meet their KPIs or whatever, that's the ding, or they are resisting, to what is the true definition of a leader? How do they develop that empathy, compassion, and have that desire, which, I don't know, can you train for desire? I think that's something that, how do you coach organizations on that, like developing that layer of leadership where they actually find that desire to have those questions or have those conversations. That's tough.
Sure. So we teach it's 3 circles that we teach, right? And the more you can get these 3 circles to overlap, the greater the results. And the 3 circles are respect for people, right? And we teach a staircase that can help the organization. It can also help individual leaders. Emotional and psychological safety is the second circle, right? Which is really all about leadership courage, leadership compassion, and leadership vulnerability. If those 3 things are missing, it doesn't matter how much other stuff, I don't care how great your purpose is, how much you're trying to save the world, right? How much plastic you remove from the oceans every year. No matter how powerful your purpose is, if your leaders do not demonstrate leadership courage, leadership compassion, and vulnerability, people will not feel psychologically and emotionally safe, and they're never going to raise their hands. They're going to go inside, right? They're going to go underground, and they're going to become cynical and feel like they're not respected, and they're never going to share the things that need to be shared. And the
Yeah.
third circle is adaptive leadership, right? And so you're right. I think, particularly with the younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, that group, they want to be led this way, and that's the leaders that they want to be. They've just not there. A lot of organizations just haven't made it clear that that's the expectation, and that they have permission to lead that way. And I think that's where the change management group, right, the OCM group and the human resource group can play a big role in all of this. And yes, I think you can be trained, right? I think you can be trained to, once you're given permission, I think, and you're given the space to do it, and the process has been altered to give space to have these discussions, then I think folks can respond and can change the way their approach to leading people. But I will tell you, it's really, really hard to do it in the middle of the change.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. Awareness, I think, can lead to that desire that can do all and then the training can reinforce it. And you're absolutely right. In the midst of change, it does feel, it's like, ideally you can preempt some of what will happen as a result of the change by having conversations before it ever happens. You talked about the 3 kind of circles and how they overlap. I think about it as connection, collaboration, compassion. So some of the same tenets there. And how, as a leader, if I focus on connection being that vulnerability, the social relationships, getting to know people beyond just the value that they bring to the organization, collaboration, how do you create that sense of belonging? Because that's a big part of, as I think about grief, and the grief that I've had in my life, having it, when I'm suffering alone, it feels a lot worse than when I have people to be there and support me and acknowledge what I'm feeling. So, that's where the collaboration and then compassion, I think, comes to recognizing that everyone is going through a loss. Grief is a loss, and change represents a loss. And so I love that we're sort of saying the same thing, but differently. And I think it's a really important, it's important for change management practitioners, project managers, HR, for any leader of people to be thinking about what you're talking about, that grief is a part of the process, that grief change, as you said it. And that by acknowledging it, that is really the first step. And then you can have the right types of conversations. One thing, we've talked about managers versus leaders. One simple change, I think, if I'm listening to this podcast, is that how can I do that today? And it's turning the conversations more into a coaching conversation versus a management conversation, right? Where you're asking how they did. So that would be like one recommendation I would give to someone that's practical, that's easy, asking a lot of questions, helping guide people to their own answers. What would be one simple, I know that ideally you have the leadership team for the organization on board, but if you were to give one simple thing that a people leader could implement today that would acknowledge the way that people feel when a change happens and help guide them through the process, what would that be?
Replace judgment with curiosity.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Right. So instead of, so there would be 2 things. That's one. The other would be to engage early in the process, right?
Yeah.
Don't wait for the performance to slip. In fact, we have one of the images that we like to leave in people's minds is this sort of tornado of, if you think about this process as a tornado, right? You got a supercell thunderstorm up in the clouds, and there's all this dynamic going on up there. Then the change happens, the grief happens. That's the funnel.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get all this destruction on the ground. right?
That's a great
And,
analogy.
and what happens is leaders wait for the destruction on the ground
Yeah.
because they've not been trained otherwise. They've not been
Yeah.
given permission otherwise, right? They may even have their legal team or their HR team telling you, hey, don't ask these personal questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're incented to deal with performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as part of their high performance teams culture, right? And so they wait for the performance. It's way too late. Engage early, right? And replace judgment with curiosity. It's
Yeah.
not, why are you feeling this way? It's not, you shouldn't feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you're not making your numbers. It's not, hey, if things don't improve, we're going to have to, right? It's, hey, tell me what's going on. This isn't,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't right. The curiosity, help me understand what's going on. This isn't like you to not be performing better. Help me understand, right?
Yeah.
Because I want to help you, right? So engage in that discussion. It's another way of saying ask the 5 whys, except in a much less interrogating
Yeah.
fashion,
Yeah.
right? But it's replacing judgment. Why are you doing this? With curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What's
We
happening,
understand.
right?
Yeah.
What are you feeling? What's going on? How can I help, right? And it's a dialogue. It's not a monologue,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
We are not trying to teach people how to be psychologists and grief counselors, right? What we are trying to do is help them to open up the window of discussion, to understand what the underlying issues are, and then to work with that person to get the support that they need to move on, right?
Right.
It's a very people-centric, but results-oriented process, right? To have it just be the part of the problem today with change is it's largely results-oriented,
Mm-hmm.
right? We got to hit this metric, we got to hit this milestone, right? We got to do this, we got to do that. And it doesn't really comprehend the people side. And if you go the other way and you're very people-centric, right? People-focused, but you don't ever care about the results, well, that doesn't get you anywhere either, right? Then
Right.
everybody feels great, but the organization isn't performing. And so it's blending those together, and we use those 3 circles as a way to get there, right? What
Amazing.
we want leaders to do and organizations to do is shift from I care about the numbers, I think about the people, to I care about the people and I think about the numbers,
Yeah.
right?
There's some quote by Richard Branson where he's like, take care of your employees and the rest will follow, or something like that. I mean,
Yes.
he has
Yes.
a great way of, I totally butchered the quote. Sorry, Richard. Sir Richard, I should say. So, but yeah, something along those lines
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the number one thing would be replace judgment with curiosity. You could
Yeah,
do that the moment this podcast ends,
I love it.
and people will recognize that you are leading differently.
I love it. So simple, yet difficult to put into practice unless you're aware of it, which is now everyone can be thinking about this. Anthony, we have barely scraped the surface of how, all the knowledge and resources that Grief Leaders offers. Where can people find you? How can they connect? What is the best way to get in
Sure.
touch with you and Guy?
Sure. Absolutely. So LinkedIn, I, like you, am a LinkedIn person. So connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect and share conversations and thoughts and delve in a little bit more deeply with people's experiences. And also griefleaders.com. You can, which is all one word, griefleaders.com, is where you can follow us and the articles that we publish and put out. And there's a contact form in there if you want to engage with us in sort of an introductory collaborative kind of call. Happy to do that. Those are the 2 best places to get a hold of us.
Perfect. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with Apogy's community, with the broader community on LinkedIn, because this is where it'll be posted on Apogy's YouTube channel as well. But I really appreciate that you are thinking about this and are actively teaching organizations and have this big scope of impact. And you're thinking about, obviously the individual humans are at the core of what you do. And I really respect and admire it. So thank you so much for being on the show today, and have a great rest of your day.
Well, thanks, Jessica. Really appreciate it. You too. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Take care.